librarian Ruth Sawyer, and she's written a lot of songs, stories. And, this one is a Christmas one and called Fiddler, Play Fast, Play Faster, although we're going to use a ukulele.
Christmas music.
A long time ago in the Isle of Man, there lived a young lad named Billy Nell Cullen. Billy was a fiddler, one of the best on the island. And at Christmas time, he was the first to go round with his fiddle, up the glen and over the fens, and playing for this neighbor and that from night until morning, crying the hour and the weather. 1 o'clock in the morning, cold with a mist all over. Now, whenever Billy went out, he always wore a sprig of rowan in his cap, and he carried a scrap of iron and a lump of salt in his pockets. Because in those days, the Isle of Man was a place of enchantment, and these items kept away evil spirits. Now it was the eve of St. Thomas, 3 nights before Christmas Eve, and Billy was walking along the cliffs. He looked down at Rushen Abbey, which stood by the ruins of Castle Rushen. Now this was the oldest abbey on the island. As Billy walked past, he wondered if the brothers were awake and praying. He'd been playing his fiddle, and now he stopped to call the hour and the weather. 2 o'clock in the morning, cold with a mist all over. But he had scarcely finished calling out when he heard, coming from the dark behind him, the sound of running feet. Well, instinctively, Billy reached up to touch the sprig of rowan, but it had gone. It must have fallen out when he was pushing through the branches in the old forest. He shivered. What could be following him in the dark? Billy Nell's feet moved fast, moved faster. But as fast as he went, the footsteps grew closer and closer and closer. And then a voice called out, "Stop! I command you!" What power there was in that voice. Against his will, Billy stopped. He was so frightened he forgot about the iron and salt in his pocket. If only he had remembered, he might have thrown them between himself and whatever called to him from the dark. But Billy stopped, and he said to himself, "Could it be the Noid Nahanmi, the enemy of the soul, who calls me?" Suddenly he was surrounded by a reddish light that came from everywhere and nowhere. It was a light the color of fever or heat lightning. But when he turned, he saw a handsome gentleman. The man was fine and tall, grave and stern, well dressed with knee breeches, silver buckles, and lace sleeves. And the stranger spoke like a gentleman. "Billy Nell Cullen, you are a monstrous good fiddler, or so I hear. People say you are the best on the island." "I play fair," Billy said. "I would have you play for me. Look." He dipped his white, long-fingered hand into his pocket and showed Billy a fistful of gold coins. And in the light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, Billy noticed there were strange markings etched into the coins. "You can have as much of this gold as you could carry away with you," said the stranger, "if you will play for me and my company 3 nights from tonight." "Where shall I play?" said Billy. "I will send a messenger for you. He will meet you halfway up the glen just before midnight." "I'll be there," said Billy, because he had never seen so much gold in his life, but he shivered as he said it. At that moment, a rooster crowed from far away. A branch brushed across Billy's eyes, and the mist came down cold and thick. And when he looked around, he found himself alone. Billy ran all the way down the hill, crying the hour and the weather. 3 o'clock in the morning, cold, with a heavy mist. Now, when he woke up later that morning, he realized that the night he had agreed to play for the stranger was Christmas Eve. A sort of terror overtook him, and he didn't know what to do. And then he decided to go to Rushen Abbey and ask the old abbot for his advice. When Billy arrived there, he found the brothers all working in the garden, their cowls thrown back from their faces, their bare feet planted in the brown earth. He asked to see the abbot and told the old man about his strange job offer. "Should I go, your reverence? Is it honest gold the stranger is giving me? I don't know what to do." And the abbot answered, I cannot say. Only the night will bring you the answers. Go, Billy. Bring salt and iron and ball and bang. Play a dance and watch. Play another dance and watch. Then, play what you feel and see. And now it was Christmas Eve, and Billy was walking up the glen. He had his fiddle wrapped in fleece to keep out the wet. And as he walked, a thick, dark mist came down so heavy that in the blackness he had to feel his way along the track like a blind man. He was just passing the ruins of Castle Rushen when, without warning, he was lifted high into the air and carried along as though by the mist itself. And just as suddenly, he found himself once more on solid ground. The mist rolled back to reveal the most splendid vision Billy had ever seen. He was standing in the courtyard of a grand castle with lights blazing from all the windows. The door was open and he could hear loud sounds of laughter and merriment from within. And standing before him was the gentleman, finely dressed in satins and velvets, gold and jewels, and all around him stood high-born lords and ladies. The stranger led Billy into the center of the great hall. Billy unwrapped his fiddle, rosined his bow, sweetened the strings, and limbered his fingers. The laughter died away. And in the silence, the voice of his host called out, "Fiddler, play fast, play faster." Never before or again did Billy play as fast as he did that night. The music seemed to come from 100 fiddles, and all around him whirled the dancers like crazy rainbows in blue and orange, yellow and purple, red and green, until his head swam with the colors. And yet their feet made no sound at all. The only sound that could be heard was Billy's fiddle, and above it all the voice of his host calling out, "Fiddler, play fast, play faster." Billy played faster and faster and faster. He played tunes he never even knew before, tunes that sobbed and shrieked and howled in pain. And the dancers went round and round, and above it again the host cried out, "Fiddler, play fast, play faster." And Billy played faster and faster, and then he became aware of the only other figure in the hall who was not dancing. The figure stood beside the door. He was wearing the dark robes of a monk with his cowl over his head, and yet Billy knew the monk was looking straight at him. And as he watched, he saw the monk bring one finger to his lips. And then Billy recalled an old legend about a monk who got drunk on Christmas Eve and fell asleep in the middle of midnight mass, and how the next morning on Christmas Day he had disappeared, never to be seen again. And as Billy remembered that story, he also recalled the words of the old abbot, and his fear left him. And he began to play and play, and again the devil called out, "Fiddler, play fast, play faster." And Billy played faster so quickly that his bow seemed to blur over the strings, and then he put his whole body into the mad music and walked it across the hall, right to where the stranger was standing. Billy crashed out the last notes of the tune. At the feet of the stranger, he dropped the salt and iron and ball and bang. And in the brief moment of silence that followed, he drew out the notes of a Christmas carol. Softly, sweetly, it rose in the air. Adeste fidelis, lete nivum fantes venite, venite, in Bethlehem. Natum videte, regum angelorum, venite adoremus, venite adoremus, venite adoremus, Dominum. For a moment, all was silent, and then the screaming began. Billy had to put his hands up to his head to block out the howls and wails and shrieks of agony. Before his eyes, the servants turned into fleshless skeletons, the lords and ladies into howling demons, until the only two figures standing in the room were Billy and the stranger. The stranger pulled back his cowl, and just for a moment, he smiled. And then he began to crumble until there was nothing left but a heap of dust shifting among the blades of grass. But Billy saw among the heap of gray one bright spark. He picked it up and tossed it high into the wind. And then he watched as it blew higher and higher and higher until it vanished from among the stars. Billy picked up his fiddle and began to play. He played his way all the way down the glen, stopping every now and then to call the hour and the weather. 3 o'clock of the morning, the sky is clear. It's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. Thank you.